Hey, welcome everybody. So far in our unit on European overseas exploration and expansion, we've discussed the reasons why Europeans set out into the Atlantic. They were, of course, seeking a sea route to Asia so they could get a hold of Asia's trade and riches. We also learned that in the process, they kind of sort of accidentally, quote, discovered the New World, the Americas. We also saw how, with the discovery of the Americas, there is now a rush to colonize and to exploit that land. Well, this new connection now between New World and Old, between the Americas and Europe, Africa, Asia, creates a new phenomenon called the global economy. And a global economy is a situation where nations and areas and regions on one side of the world and the other now become interconnected and dependent upon one another for their economic growth. And so colonization and the changing global economy is the topic for our session today. And with all this colonization and the growth of the global economy, we're going to see a new economic philosophy being born out of all of this. We'll look at what that economic philosophy is, how it works, and what influence it's going to have on Europe and the world beyond. We'll also talk about something called mercantilism. What is this concept, and how is this concept pushing nations to sort of establish overseas colonies for the purpose of making themselves more wealth and more powerful? Additionally, with this global economy being a very, very competitive place, we see nations looking to protect their trade and business in this competitive global marketplace. We'll look at what some of the steps are that these nations take to protect their trade and protect their businesses in this very competitive global economy. And finally, we'll introduce ourselves to something called the joint stock company. We'll figure out what a joint stock company is, why these things were created, and what purpose they serve, and we'll see how the joint stock company, in the way that it functions, is very, very similar to the sort of modern corporations that are today publicly traded on our modern stock markets. The joint stock company is really the precursor to the modern day corporation. We'll see how all of that plays out. So those are the essential questions. That's what we're going to cover in today's session. Thus, without further ado, let's go ahead and begin. Okay, so we know that all this overseas expansion is creating immense amounts of wealth for the nations of Europe. Spain, as we already know, controls much of North and South America, the South American continent, Central America, and all the way up into what is today the southwestern portion of the United States of America. Portugal does have some colonial land in South America, but they're more largely interested in trade with Africa and Asia than they are with colonization. The Dutch, of course, also set up colonies in North America as well. We alluded to this in the last session. The largest of these colonies was a place called New Amsterdam, located on Manhattan Island. And yes, it is, as you might have guessed, present-day New York City. So America's largest and most well-known city did not begin as an English colony, but instead as a Dutch colony. When the English took it from the Dutch, they changed the name from New Amsterdam to New York, and, well, the rest is history. Now, all the wealth being created by these nations is leading to a new economic philosophy in Europe and across the globe. See, during the old days, in the medieval period, a nation's power was measured by the amount of land that it possessed. Land meant power because your wealth was derived from your land. But those days are long gone. All the wealth being created by overseas exploration and colonization is leading to a new economic philosophy in which a nation's power is related to its wealth in gold and silver. Thus, the more wealth in gold and silver that you have in your treasury, in your coffers, the more powerful your nation is. Because what can you do with that wealth? You can buy things that make you powerful. Bigger armies, larger navies, new technologies. Money equals power. Wealth equals power. And thus, it becomes the goal of every nation to amass as much money as possible. Because again, money equals power. It's going to be a main driver of a lot of what we see here today. Now, with this new economic philosophy, England and France, knowing that they have to keep up with their rivals, they feel the need to start setting up colonies around the world as well. We kind of talked about this in the last session. Spain controls pretty much South America, Central America, and the southern portion of what is the United States, which really leaves the northern part of North America for the French and the English, and that's where they focus their colonization efforts. And an economic system referred to as mercantilism is used by European nations in the 1600s to use their colonies to accumulate as much wealth as possible. Mercantilism really involves the government being heavily involved in setting up and regulating these colonies and using them to support the economy of the mother country being the country that set up the colony. Now, the colonies would be used basically to provide raw materials and resources for industries back home. Okay, so let's say that you have, I don't know, a furniture industry, or you make fur coats, or you make tobacco products, or you make rum, right? Well, the colonies would help make the mother country more self-sufficient by producing the raw materials needed to complete the finished products back home in the mother country. Let's say that in the mother country you make furniture, right? Well, your colonies might be used to get the lumber to make your furniture. So your colonies would cut down the trees, the raw material, send it back to the mother country where they make the furniture. Or maybe, your colonies are used to trap the furs for their pelts to make the fur coats, which you'd produce in the mother country. Maybe your colony grows tobacco, which is then processed after it is harvested and sent back to the mother country to make tobacco products. Or maybe you've got a sugarcane plantation in the Caribbean somewhere where you grow sugarcane, process it, it's sent back to the mother country, and there they turn it into rum. The colonies help to make the mother country more self-sufficient because by producing these raw materials in your colonies, that means you don't have to buy them from someone else. You don't have to buy them from another country, thus giving money to that country, thus giving them more wealth, thus giving them more power. You become more self-sufficient by producing your own raw materials to produce your own products. Then the businesses and manufacturers in the mother country would take their finished products and export the finished goods to other countries or even right back to the colonies themselves. Thus, we see that the colonies are making the mother country more self-sufficient. They're helping the businesses to prosper in the mother country, and when the businesses prosper, the country makes more money, and as we know, more money equals more power, and that's the name of the game in this new global economic philosophy. It's all about ways to amass wealth because more wealth equals more power. Now, to continue to prosper under this mercantilist philosophy, governments would try to encourage manufacturing within their own countries. And one of the ways that they would do this in this very, very competitive global marketplace is by setting taxes on imported goods. These taxes are called tariffs. So a tariff is a tax on an imported good. And what does a tax do? Taxes make things more expensive. And so tariffs are intended to make imported goods more expensive than domestic goods. Domestic goods are stuff that you make in your own home country. So just the same way as a tax makes anything more expensive, whether it is a taco or whether it is a TV or whether it's a toy action figure, the same holds true for imported goods. Taxes make stuff more expensive. So when you put a tax on an import, it makes the import cost more money. You look at the graphic that we have there on the screen. Cloth, for example. American-made cloth would cost $4 a roll in our example. British-made cloth also costs $4 a roll. So you have roughly identical cloth at an identical price. But as a government, you want people to buy your domestic homemade products. So you slap an extra tax on that foreign-made cloth. In this case, 25%, right? On a $4 roll of cloth, that 25% comes out to $1. So when you are back in the U.S. now, in our example, and you have two rolls of cloth in front of you, one of them American-made and one of them foreign-made in Britain, the extra tax makes the British cloth cost $5 as opposed to the American cloth costing $4. And by the nature of the consumer, which one are we more likely to purchase? The one that costs less money, the cheaper one, right? The one that was made in our home country. Thus, this is a way for governments to sort of encourage people to buy their domestically made products, support their domestic industries. And as the domestic industries make more sales, they make more money. This creates more wealth for the mother country, and as we know, more wealth equals more power. So tariffs are used to protect domestic businesses in this very competitive global marketplace. Now, nations using these methods, they want to create what's called a favorable or a positive balance of trade. The balance of trade is sort of the relationship between the amount of goods that you export or sell to other countries versus the amount of goods that you import or buy from other countries. You want to maintain a positive balance of trade. A positive balance of trade is a situation in which a nation exports more goods than it imports. So you're selling more stuff, thus making more money, than things that you're buying, thus spending. Right? You want to make sure that you're having more income than you are expenditures. It's no different than if you have a job and you're making $500 a week and you only spend $200 a week. Thus, you have a positive balance in your checking account. That's what you want. You want to export more goods than you import. You want to make more money than you spend. However, if a nation imports more goods than it exports, that is to say, it spends more money on foreign goods than money it makes by selling stuff to other countries, then you have what's called a negative balance of trade. And countries don't want that. That's not a way to make money. That's not what you want. A positive balance of trade allows a nation to have more wealth coming into the country for exports than going out for imports. And this additional wealth gives you more money for your businesses, more money for your country. And as we've already mentioned, I think you're starting to figure this out. More money equals more power, because that's the name of the game. Now, all of this hinges on the successful setting up of colonies. But unfortunately, setting up colonies is really risky and really, really expensive. You think what it costs to outfit a boat and supplies and send it over to the New World to set up that colony. It's really expensive. You think of all the risks involved. The boat could get caught in a storm and sink on the way over there, or the colonists could catch plague and everyone dies, or you could run into hostile natives, or pirates could destroy your colony. All kinds of things could go bad. So it's really, really risky, and it's so expensive that only extremely rich entrepreneurs or governments could afford to do this stuff. But even then, there aren't many people who are willing to take on the risk and the cost of such heavy potential losses. This is where the joint stock company comes into play. Joint stock companies were developed to try to rectify this problem. See, a joint stock company, instead of having one large investor, is made up of many smaller investors who pool their money, their resources, their capital together to fund a colony or a trade voyage. And what the trade company does is sell stock or shares in itself. And they would sell stocks or shares to many large and small investors. And this allows these investors to all share in the risks and the profits of the trading company. See, think of it like this. Let's say you want to start up a lemonade stand, right? I know this is lame, but just hear me out. Lemonade stand. Let's say it's going to cost $100 to start up your lemonade stand. You don't really want to sink $100 into it yourself. It's a lot of risk. What if your lemonade sucks and you don't make any money? Then you're out $100. But what if, say, you convince 9 of your friends to go in on this with you, and the 10 of you each put in only $10? You still raise the $100 that you need to start your lemonade stand, but because you shared the risk and pooled your resources with others, each individual person is taking on less financial burden and less risk. You still got the money you need to start it up, but it's less risk for each individual. And as an investor in this venture, whether it is a lemonade stand or a colony, if your venture makes a profit, then the investors are happy. They make profits, and you make a profit that's relative to the amount of money that you invested in this particular venture. However, if there's a loss, if your lemonade sucks or the colony goes belly up, those people who invested in it, yes, they'll be sad, but here's the kicker. You can only lose the amount of money that you actually invested in the venture, in the colony, or in the lemonade stand. And so what we have then is a situation where sharing risk provides a stable way of raising funds for voyages, for starting up colonies throughout the world, because colonies are very important for this mercantilist system and for countries to be able to make more money and gain more power in the world. And so companies like the Dutch East India Company, the Virginia Company, the Hudson Bay Companies, these really in a lot of ways are the first true modern companies in history, because their setup and their function is very similar to that of a modern corporation, in that when you buy stock in one of these companies, you become part owner. When you buy stock in a corporation, you become part owner of that corporation, and you as an investor will see profits or losses relative to the profits and losses of the company into which you have invested. So we really see the birth of the modern company, and these things work very similar to the way modern corporations work that are publicly traded on our stock markets today. Well, that's where we're going to leave it off, guys. But we took a look at the new global economy, the new economic philosophy being born out of all this overseas expansion, that wealth equals power. And the goal of every nation is to make as much wealth as possible. And to make as much wealth as possible, you see nations engaging in mercantilism, setting up colonies for the purpose of making money to make the mother country stronger. We saw the ways in which they tried to protect trade and business through things like tariffs, trying to keep a positive balance of trade. And we also saw the creation of the joint stock company as a way to make colonization a little bit less expensive and risky and giving rise to the modern corporation as we know it today. Well, guys, those are the essential questions. Make sure you study them and know them, and I can't wait to talk about them the next time that we meet. But until that time, as always, I bid you farewell.